You ever see a big company in the headlines for some scandal and just think, how did that happen? I mean, these are smart, successful people. Why do they sometimes make these just disastrously bad decisions? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on business ethics and really dig into the hidden forces that shape our choices.
Okay, so to get us started, let's look at some names you'll almost certainly recognize. These are stories that show just how high the stakes really are when things go sideways.
First up, Enron. Remember them? A huge energy company that, well, it pretty much collapsed overnight. And why? Because of systematic, completely fraudulent accounting. The fallout was just immense. It wiped out thousands of jobs and literally billions of dollars in shareholder value. A total catastrophe.
Then you've got Volkswagen. Back in 2015, the world found out that the company had been deliberately cheating on emissions tests for years. For years. They were actively misleading their customers, governments, you name it, all about the environmental impact of their cars. And, of course, Theranos. This company made these incredibly bold, game-changing claims about a new kind of blood testing technology. The only problem? It didn't work, not even close. And that directly put the health of actual patients, people who trusted them, at risk. So, this all leads to the big question, right? Why does this stuff keep happening? Is it really just a few bad apples spoiling the bunch? Or is there something, deeper going on here? Something systemic that leads to these massive ethical failures?
To really get to the bottom of this, the whole field of business ethics gives us two very different but equally powerful toolkits to analyze these kinds of problems. So at its heart, business ethics is all about studying moral values and actions inside a business. But to truly get it, you have to look at it from two completely different angles: what we should do, and then what we actually end up doing.
And this brings us to this really key split in how we can think about ethics. On one side, you have normative ethics. This is the philosopher's view, totally focused on what we ought to do. You can think of it as our moral compass. But on the other side, you've got descriptive ethics. This is the scientist's view, exploring why we make the choices we do. This is our psychological X-ray.
Let's start with that first toolkit, the philosopher's compass. This whole approach is about figuring out the right direction and laying down the principles for how we should act. It really tries to tackle that huge, fundamental question. How do we even figure out what's right or wrong in the first place? What kind of frameworks can possibly guide us through these murky waters?
Well, philosophers have given us a few different ways to think about this. There's utilitarianism, which is all about creating the greatest good for the greatest number. Then there's deontology, which is way more focused on moral duty. It basically argues that some things, like lying or stealing, are just wrong, period, no matter what the outcome is. And then you have stakeholder theory, which pushes businesses to think about everyone affected, not just shareholders, but employees, customers, the whole community.
The utilitarian view is pretty rational, right? It asks us to weigh all the consequences and pick the path that leads to the most good. But the challenge, as you can probably guess, is that trying to calculate every single possible outcome for everyone involved is, well, it's incredibly difficult, if not impossible.
Okay, so the compass helps us find our true north. But honestly, that's only half the story. Now let's pick up that second tool, the psychologist's X-ray, to see the hidden forces that are so often pulling us off course without us even realizing it.
And here is the really startling insight from descriptive ethics. A lot of the time, this isn't about bad people trying to make bad choices. It's often about good people being influenced by factors they are completely unaware of.
We call these factors cognitive biases or ethical blind spots. For example, confirmation bias makes us favor information that already supports what we believe. Overconfidence bias can make us way too sure of our own moral character. And then there's in-group bias, where we tend to favor our own team. I mean, think back to Volkswagen. That's a perfect case of in-group bias, where protecting the team became more important than being honest with the rest of the world.
So why do we even have these blind spots? The Nobel laureate Herbert Simon explained it with this idea called bounded rationality. The gist is, we try to be rational, we really do, but we're limited by our own brain's processing power and the info we have at hand. We're just human, We're not supercomputers.
And this is the absolute key takeaway from the descriptive approach. These biases, they often work just below the surface of our consciousness. That means it's often an error in how we think, not a failure of our character that leads to these horrible outcomes.
So, now we have a compass that tells us where we should go, and we have an X-ray that shows us all the hidden stuff in our way. The real question is, How do we actually use these two powerful tools together to build better, more ethical businesses? The answer is pretty clear. You absolutely cannot have one without the other. An organization needs that strong moral compass to set clear ethical standards, but it also needs that X-ray to understand the psychological realities that can stop people from actually following that compass even when they want to.
So what does this look like in the real world? Well, the research points to a pretty clear three-step path. First, you use that philosopher's compass to set clear moral norms, to really define what doing the right thing even looks like for your organization. Second, you build a whole structure around those norms, with rules and incentives that actually reward ethical behavior. And finally, and this is so important, you actively train people to use that psychological X-ray on themselves, to become aware of their own biases and blind spots.
Which brings us to one last thought to leave you with. The next time you're facing a tough choice, doesn't matter if it's big or small, just take a second and ask yourself, what invisible force, what unseen bias or hidden assumption might be shaping my decision right now?